This shall be read over a figure of the deceased, and shall have offered wine and bread, for whom such things are done, shall have an existence among the living ones, and he shall never perish. And he shall have being like unto that of the holy God. No evil thing whatsoever shall attack him, and he shall be like unto happy soul in Amentent, and he shall not die a second death. He shall eat and drink in the presence of Osiris each day. He shall be borne along. I am yesterday and tomorrow, and I have the power to be born again.
He who was seated on the throne said, I am making everything new. Then he said, write this down, for these words are trustworthy and true. He said to me, it is done. I am the Alpha and the Omega, the beginning and the end. To the thirsty I will give water without cost from the spring of the water of life. Those who are victorious will inherit all this, and I will be their God, and they will be my children. Now get this. But the cowardly, the unbelieving, the vile, the murderers, the sexually immoral, those who practice magic arts, the idolaters, and all liars, they will be consigned to the fiery lake of burning sulfur. This is the second death. These are like magical incantation hymns, and they believe they had power, which reminds me of the Eucharist. It reminds me of the idea that where Jesus is saying, if you eat of my flesh and drink of my blood, you will live forever. If you practice this, if you actually, my body is true life, like I come from heaven, all of this stuff that Jesus says in John 6.
So I'm thinking about this, right? I'm trying to put myself back in the first century. Augustus builds all these new temples. 70, it says, according to Mary, like 70 or maybe more. And a whole bunch of them, I guess 14 of them, are Egyptian or like Eastern, not Greco-Roman, but new, like Temple of Isis is the biggest one. And they thought that Isis was Demeter. There was no difference. If you can take a statue of a Demeter and call it Isis, or you call it Demeter, it's the same thing. In fact, Demeter, the myth of Demeter, is a retelling of the myth of Ishtar. So the three
is
of those
Demeter
gods, connected to Gaia? Hesiod has two different characters for Demeter and for Gaia. But when you think about it, you almost wonder if there was a time where there was maybe one mother goddess, or you know what I mean?
Yeah.
The reason why I'm saying that is because Demeter is the Deo Mater, the godmother, and then Zeus is Zeus Pater, godfather. That's the godfather and godmother. It's like, I don't know. Everything changes over time, and you get all these syncretisms and all these new gods, these new pantheons. The Romans come over; they have a whole new thing now, and it's all based off
older stuff too.
Well, based off borrowing from Egyptians, borrowing from the Phrygians. The Phrygians have their own religion. The Thracians have their own religion.
I like how you started it in the Greco-Roman Augustus period, right here at the time Jesus is on the scene.
There's a reason why. This is when everything changed. Augustus changed the world.
Right.
Changed the Roman world, but like
right.
the world, you know what I mean?
Which also impacted what we now call Christianity. This whole he is like a huge pivot here, but you talk about 70, right? We know there's 70 sons of El. This goes all the way back to Canaanite. Who knows where that came from? Like, how far back does this go? But the 14 is something I wanted to jump back a little. And right there, just to point out, I don't know if we should take Paul at his word in the literal sense. See, this is what it makes me wonder. Like, do numbers play this significant role to the point where Paul says in Galatians 2:1, right? Then after 14 years, I went up again to Jerusalem with Barnabas, taking Titus along with me. Now, maybe it meant 14 years, no reason to not take him at his word. But 14 is something significant, biblically speaking, because when you go back, what do we find? We see Jacob, right? He finds Rachel at the well. By the way, it's kind of a bit of an incest type of situation in a way, because she's like his first cousin or something. I can't remember. It's something like that. But he saw she was beautiful. He kissed her on the mouth, it says. So he goes to her father and says, look, I'll do anything. Like, I'll work for you for 7 years for Rachel. I love her. After 7 years, the father tricks him, gives him Leah, and Jacob means like trickster anyway. The name literally means trickster. So it's funny that the trickster's getting tricked, but then eventually he tricks his father, Laman, in the end, and takes his family and his flock and all this stuff. He ends up rich because of him. Well, then he serves 7 more years. So here's 14 years of like serving for the love of his life. 7 years, he gets Leah, and he's like, all right, I'll serve more. Then 7 more years, boom, he gets Rachel.
The
Then
Epic of Gilgamesh uses that same 7 and 7, 7 years of drought, 7 years of famine. In the Epic of Gilgamesh, Ishtar is she's trying to kill Gilgamesh because he won't get with her. He won't marry her. He refused because of what all her past husbands, like Tammuz, are all end up dead or in the underworld. So he's like, I don't want no party. So she gets pissed off and goes back up to heaven to Anu. She's like, I need to borrow the bowl of heaven. I gotta go kill. I go send it to go kill Gilgamesh because he doesn't want to marry me, right? And then he says something along the lines of, if I give you the bowl of heaven, there will be 7 years of drought. And then she says something along the lines of, but I prepared 7 years in advance.
Yeah, so maybe it's just like the Pharaoh in Egypt in the Bible. So there's a connection between Mesopotamian and Egyptian lore here, I think, because we talked about this before we hit record. I was like, we got to record this. You pointed out
that's the origin of all this stuff. Is Sumer?
It's gotta be.
That's where it all starts.
But Egypt really capitalized on some of this as well, so we can't rule that out.
Isis is a retelling of Ishtar,
right?
And they took Tammuz and they made him. They blew him up and died. Or Osiris. Like, he's not because Tammuz is really not that big of a deal,
right? They made Osiris a bigger.
They made him
or at least maybe he is. Maybe we're not really certain because the problem is we can't. Maybe we're lacking information. Maybe we aren't realizing how significant
we're missing. Right.
But I like what you said earlier about Osiris. So Osiris literally, the meaning here, it delves into him.
He's a resurrection god. I don't care what anyone says.
Yeah.
There's nothing. I'm convinced. When people say he doesn't resurrect, I don't even care if he doesn't. He is a resurrection god.
Right.
Period.
Right.
That's what he does.
I agree.
Is a yearly annual thing.
He brings moisture.
They depict him as a dead god in the wintertime, and then he's green in the summertime. That's how they depict him in the calendars.
It's agricultural.
He's black, dark black. He's dead. He's the dead god. The Phrygians had a dead god. Was Pappus. He was like another version of this vegetation god. The more and more I'm looking at this, the more I'm starting to think that Jesus is I don't want to say I don't know how to. I'm trying to find the right words for this.
There's something going on, and you're not trying to say he's agricultural technically, but because it's evolved into the Hellenistic period where now these people are personalizing these deities, and it's not just nationalistic and it's not just agricultural. They're internalizing and making it personal.
The remnants of these ancient resurrecting vegetation deities are shown in Jesus. You can see it
100%. So real quick on Joseph, just to make that point that you're bringing out, okay? Here you have Joseph, the coat of many colors Joseph in the Old Testament that we talk about. Here is this guy who interprets dreams, all right? He literally interprets the baker and the wine bearer, which is something we're going to get to here in the Book of the Dead that I think is going to be interesting. You're going to point out. But then he's interpreting the dream of the Pharaoh, and the Pharaoh has 2 consecutive dreams. The first one, I think, is about the cows. He said there's 7 fat cows, and they get swallowed up by 7 skinny cows. Mesopotamia would have the same thing like you're talking about, drought and not. And then, find the one in the Mesopotamian mythology as well.
So we have it right.
Yeah, and then the second one is there's 7 wheat heads, and then there's 7 skinny or not good wheat heads. The not good wheat heads swallow up the good wheat heads. The point is there's going to be a famine. After the 7 years of plenty, there's going to be 7 years of famine. And you cannot pretend that the Bible author, who is talking about an Egyptian king, what we would call Pharaoh, in Egypt, with Joseph in Egypt, talking about agriculture, famine and plenty, which is right there among the Nile, and not think that these authors are not aware of Osiris and his dying and rising motif in this. I don't care when or where this was written, these stories were there, and the authors had to be aware. And I just highly recommend people do that, is like consider looking at this and going, hold on, does the author who's writing this, whoever this biblical author is, are they aware of this Osiris motif? And are they using it to kind of combine it into their biblical story? Did you happen to find that?
Yes, I just found it just now. Okay. So here it is. Father, give me the bowl of heaven so we can kill Gilgamesh in his dwelling. If you do not give me the bowl of heaven, I will knock down the gates of the netherworld. I will smash the doors. I will shut the doors flat down. I will let the dead go up. She's resurrecting the dead already. So if you demand the bowl of heaven from me, there will be 7 years of empty husks for the land of Uruk. Have you collected grain for the people? Have you made grasses grow for the animals? Ishtar addressed her father, saying, I have heaped grain in the granaries for the people.
This sounds just like Joseph.
Joseph
literally becomes the person in Egypt who
7 years
puts the grain inside of the grain. What do you call those? Where they stored the food, and people had to come to Egypt in order to survive, according to the story.
Yeah, so Anu says, I'll give you the bowl of heaven, but if I do, there'll be 7 years of famine.
Mm-hmm.
And he says, do you have enough grain to get through this? And she says, yes. And then he gives her the bowl of heaven. There's clearly a mimesis happening right there.
Absolutely. So this story about Osiris, Isis, and what's going on here in the Book of the Dead. Let's get into the whole eating the bread and the wine for a second before we get into this moisture dry comparison of Isis and Osiris. So what is going, and maybe it plays into this whole bread and the wine as well, because one's dry and then one is moist. You've got bread and you've got, which is dry, and then you have moisture, which is wine.
This is why I brought up Demeter in the beginning. Mm-hmm. I knew we were going to get back to this, because I'm now starting to look into Eleusinian mysteries. Mm-hmm. Eleusinian mysteries. And this is the salvation cult of Rome. Okay? And it's, you get initiated, you're saved. The people who went to these rites, they according to different authors, Plutarch, some other people, said that when people went into these initiation rites, they no longer feared death. They thought they had eternal life forever.
Right.
So the reason why I bring that up is because in the mysteries you have this Dionysus, the vine, and on the other side you have Demeter, the grain.
Mm-hmm.
So you have
dry and wet.
Now check this out. Now if Demeter really is Isis and Dionysus really is Osiris, what does the Book of the Dead have to say about this? Right. It says
now this is old, if anyone's asking.
Thousands of years before Christianity.
Right.
We don't even know how old this is. We know it's at least 2000 BCE. Could be older than that. But it has to go at least to that far. So I'm not going to read the whole thing, but I'll just describe what it is. It's called.
Where is this at, by the way?
This is a funerary hymn for the dead, for anointing dead people, for oiling their body, making them into mummies. They would sing these hymns that are written in Egyptian. This is an English translation. This particular one is found in Papyrus New, British Museum, 1047-7, sheet 16. If anyone wants to look it up, just so you know where we're getting this from. We're not just making this up. It's not just from the internet or something. This is real document. All right. So there's a bunch of hymns to Osiris. It says, the Osiris Nu hath delivered the boat of the sun therewith, and he cometh forth into heaven. Osiris Nu sailed about in heaven. He traveleth therein. So there's a lot of just a lot of this repetition of Osiris in heaven, right? Mm-hmm. But the important part that I want to point out is at the end, there's an inscription for the reader. It says, this shall be read over a figure of the deceased, which shall be placed in a model of the boat of the sun. And behold, he that reciteth shall be washed and shall be ceremonially pure. This is salvation. You're saving somebody. And shall have burnt, And he shall have burnt incense before Ra, also Ammon. That's the same God. And shall have offered wine and bread and roasted fowl. That's an offering. So that's the sin offering. And journeyed the deceased in the boat of Ra. Now every soul for whom such things are done shall have an existence among the living ones, and he shall never perish. But this is getting, now you're about to sound like Revelation right here. Ready?
Mhm.
And he shall have being like unto that of the holy God. No evil thing whatsoever shall attack him, and he shall be like unto happy soul in Amentent. That's probably heaven. And he shall not die a second death. He shall eat and drink in the presence of Osiris each day. He shall be borne along. It's close. I wonder what that. I want to look at these Egyptian words and try to.
Yeah.
It says he shall be borne along with the kings of the north and the south, each and every day.
So it might be a nationalistic type of, but second death. Here are these magical words. These words aren't just words. In those days, they had power. I mean, like even some people think that today. Don't say that. Don't say that. You might hex me, or you might curse me, or you say that it might come true, whatever. And that's how people are today. So we've had this for thousands of years. Who knows how long they thought words had power? But these are like magical incantation hymns, and they believe they had power, which reminds me of the Eucharist. It reminds me of the idea that where Jesus is saying, if you eat of my flesh and drink of my blood, you will live forever. If you practice this, if you actually, my body is true life. Like I come from heaven, all of this stuff that Jesus says in John 6, which may have not only a Greek influence, because people think this is written by someone who's probably a Greek, but this influence has to come from other mythologies, Dionysus and Egyptian, I think, especially this born again or born from above concept. Where is this coming from?
Well, here's the thing about that. Dionysus and Osiris are the moisture, are the vine,
Right.
are the grapes. Because you in this Eucharist, you have the bread and the wine, right?
Mm-hmm.
In the Lusanian mysteries, you have Demeter and Osiris, grain and vine.
Mm-hmm.
But in this Egyptian text, Osiris, according to Plutarch, I'm looking at Plutarch right now, Moralia, Book 5. He talks about Osiris. They thought he actually was the perpetual cycle of existence, the cycle of life and death, symbolized by Ra and Osiris. Ra, the living god who descends into death and becomes Osiris, the god of the dead. Osiris ascends and comes to life again as Ra. Now, so they actually thought that he was like the grain growing, the crops growing. That was an embodiment. Even the Nile the Nile flooding was him. Mm-hmm. That was him. So eating this was no like symbolism. When they're eating the grain and drinking the wine, they were eating Osiris.
They were eating him, yeah. And this I've heard the wheat stalk is like his erection. The water from the Nile is his semen. So here you have this god actually moisturing the dry land and getting it pregnant, getting Isis pregnant. So you're actually consuming, I guess you'd say, a mixture of both, but definitely Osiris. You know, you have this Isis Osiris you're eating of. And Jesus is obviously saying, I'm going to give you life. Eat and ingest of me. You'll have it. It's probably a different kind. I don't really know how to answer this, but I did want to ask you.
But you have to ask the question, why? If it's not if there's no agricultural thing happening here, then what's the deal? What's the point of this Eucharist? Like because we know that this bread and wine motif is agriculture and all these other myths. And all of a sudden Christianity has it, and it's not agriculture anymore.
Yeah, that's the thing. I mean, obviously, I think its roots come from agriculture. Right. Just like resurrection probably had more of a nationalistic agricultural sense, but that's why the evolution
they repurposed it. That's what happened.
I think so. I think it kind of takes more on a personal level, because when we've read a Zalmoxis, right, there's only this little clip here in Herodotus that mentions they have a ceremonial meal in a hall. And he drinks and eats with them and tells them in this meal they're going to live forever. and they're like absolutely impressed, and they're even believing it once he comes back from his little underground cavern after 3 years, supposedly on the 4th year. They're like, oh my gosh, it's true. What his words were, which would have been back here at this ceremonial mill, were true. We're going to live forever if we believe in the Salmoxis or do whatever it is that he's trying to tell them. So this goes back hundreds of years before Jesus. My question is that Set, when you brought up Seth, okay, and you brought up Osiris. Osiris, get the image of moisture, right, for our audience that's watching. But then there's Seth, and you said this is the enemy of moisture, or Osiris, and it's dry, if I'm not mistaken, right?
Yeah.
So I want to read Revelation.
No. Seth is the dry. Seth represents the dry. He's a fire.
He's a fire. He's God a dry
fire. Yeah.
Okay.
Dry fire.
So Revelation 21. All right. Go here. Anyone who's reading Revelation, a lot of scholars would say this person's original tongue is not Greek. You can tell.
Once you're done with this, I want to blow your mind. But go ahead.
Okay. I just want to let our audience see something interesting here.
Yeah.
So if you take this tradition of moisture and dry, and the enemy of moisture is dry, or heat, fire, wet, and whatnot is good. John, whoever this author is in the book of Revelation, says, then I saw a new heaven and a new earth, for the first heaven and the first earth had passed away. There was no longer any sea. I saw the holy city, the new Jerusalem, coming down out of heaven from God, prepared as a bride, beautifully dressed for her husband. And I heard a loud voice from the throne saying, look, God's dwelling place is now among the people, and he will dwell with them. They will be his people, and God himself will be with them and be their God. He will wipe every tear from their eyes. There will be no more death, which has been like the age-old issue, or mourning, or crying, or pain, for the old order of things has passed away. He who was seated on the throne said, I am making everything new. Then he said, write this down, for these words are trustworthy and true. He said to me, it is done. I am the Alpha and the Omega, the beginning and the end. To the thirsty I will give water without cost from the spring of the water of life. Those who are victorious will inherit all this, and I will be their God, and they will be my children. Now get this. But the cowardly, the unbelieving, the vile, the murderers, the sexually immoral, those who practice magic arts, the idolaters, and all liars, they will be consigned to the fiery lake of burning sulfur. This is the second death. So you have the imagery for those who are righteous and good are going to have the waters of life. I will give the water without cost from the spring of the water of life. Moisture, water, Osiris. And in the other case, fiery lake of burning sulfur, second death. You were reading from the Book of the Dead about the second death 2,000 years before Christianity.
Ready for me to blow your mind?
Yep.
Now you heard Jesus say, "I'm the Alpha and Omega, the beginning and the first and the last." Right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
There's a papyrus. It's also in the British Museum called the Chapter of Knowledge. It's the chapter of coming forth by day, and it says, "This is Osiris talking. I am yesterday and tomorrow, and I have the power to be born again. I am the divine hidden soul who createth the gods and who giveth sepulchral meals to the divine hidden beings in the underworld." Now, there's a lot more in this that's it's all just cliche religious stuff that you would hear in Christianity or whatever. But check this out. The Tome of Nefertiti, who was not Nefertari, the wife of Ramses II. There is a depiction of 3 heads. It looks like Isis, Osiris. I'm looking at it right now. It looks like Isis, Osiris, and Ra. And then it says, "This is Ra, who comes to rest in Osiris. This is Osiris, who comes to rest in Ra. The Father and the Son are one in this particular depiction."
When you see me, you see the Father.
Right.
I am in the Father, and the Father is in me.
And that's not just in this one inscription on Nefertiti. If you read like Litwa translated the Hermetica 2, if you read that, you'll see it's the Father and the Son talking back and forth. they're having like these
No,
conversations.
I think John is the only gospel that actually goes into that kind of depth in our New
Yeah,
Testament, which is really wild because John, it has this, very cannibalistic sounding Eucharist compared to the others. One more fact that we forgot to mention that you and I discussed before the show, Plutarch talks about Osiris and says that Osiris was killed on the 17th day of the month, which the Pythagoreans made it a cursed number. But it was like a very superstitious number because, as I mentioned, there's some mathematical reasons behind why 17 is weird. But this is the Passover day. Okay, so here is the same day that Osiris is killed, is the same day Jesus is killed on Passover.
exactly the same day.
But it even gets further because it's not only that it's a
Both
full
on a
moon,
full moon. Yeah,
right? You have this full moon,
it's
you
just
have this sacrifice, okay? It goes even deeper than this, right? Because here you have this meal that Osiris has of wine and bread, dry and moist, and the full moon that Plutarch is describing that is on the 17th day of the month, which is the Passover day for the Jews. And so Jesus is in the Book of the Dead. You were reading about the bread and the wine, or the cake and the wine, right? Or it's the cake and the beer. Either way, it's some alcoholic beverage that is representative of the blood. And then you had the bread, which is the body of Osiris. But then it talks about, in the Book of the Dead, you said a burnt offering, which would have been a cooked meal. Jesus is dying on Passover, which is a burnt offering in the Jewish tradition. So you have the Eucharist and a burnt offering tradition happening here. It's really making me wonder how historical. I'm not going to say it wasn't possibly planned. Like you said, is Jesus suicidal? But is this a historical remnant? Why doesn't Paul mention Passover on the day he died? Why doesn't he mention all these details? Maybe these are just occasional letters and we just don't have them. I don't know. He does mention this weird meal in 1 Corinthians 11 that the Lord said on the night he was handed over, right? That he broke this bread and gave this kind of, this is my body for you, giving you life and whatnot, which is definitely mystery and more of a ritual rather than, I think, maybe what Jesus really said. I don't know. What was that from the Book of the Dead where we're talking about burnt offering?
yeah. This is all the Book of the Dead, the
It's
oldest. I mean, we're looking at Sumerian clay tablets that are as old as we can go back to, and these Egyptian papyri.
hieroglyphics and papyri.
These are written on the walls in Egypt, and they write them on papyrus, and it's just so old that it just makes you wonder. Diodorus of Sicily made it really clear that he says these two gods, talking about us, Isis and Osiris, they hold and regulate the entire universe, giving both nourishment and increase to all things. Moreover, practically that all the physical matter which is essential to generation of all things is furnished by these two gods, Isis and Osiris, sun and moon. It's like this is important, and the fact that Rome, Augustus era, would adopt these traditions right before Christianity comes
before Jesus,
right before, like it literally right before, and then all of a sudden we have Christianity.
We're going to pretend that
Philo living in Egypt.
Yes. Okay. That was another thing that, what really gets me curious about this. And I get critical scholarship wants to parse and segment and make sure things are separate and understand Egypt had a different kind of Christianity than other, forms of it that were floating around. And I get it. But the impact of Alexandria, we can't undermine that. I mean, even early church fathers thought that Philo might have been a Christian. And they're like, well, even if Jesus wasn't on the scene yet, he already had been shown the truth about Christ or something, They thought maybe he was in the Christian vein or was aware of Jesus or something. There was church fathers. I don't know exactly who. I think Eusebius plays a role in that somewhere where he thinks Philo might have been Christian or at least was aware of Christ coming. But this is in Alexandria, Egypt. And Mark Antony is dude, this is a guy who had all the power in the world before Augustus ended up kicking his ass. Here's this guy who was right-hand man of Julius Caesar, who becomes the first apotheosist Caesar of Rome. Not that he was the first actual emperor because Augustus was, but he gets deified because Augustus cherished him so much. So Mark Antony is right there. He gets sucked in. You could say he fell between the legs of
He wanted to be the emperor.
Cleopatra.
Yeah, he wanted to be the emperor.
Yeah, but I mean, the influence Cleopatra would have had if Mark Antony was sucked into Egypt, Alexandria, Egypt at that, to pretend that that influence did not spread wide all over the Roman world and curiosity. And then on top of that, like you're talking about, here's Caesar Augustus, who now builds 14 temples, right? You said in Egyptian temples?
Yeah.
14,
Yeah.
which hits that whole 7 and 7 thing we were talking about.
Yeah, but I don't know if that's on purpose, or I mean, it could. I don't know.
I don't know if you're building 70 temples.
Well, he dedicated 70. Well, I think what dedicated means, I think there were old temples that were like
okay.
rotted.
Either way,
he builds. Yeah, so he dedicated all these new temples, started all these new cults, and it happened to be that a lot of them were Egyptian.
Okay.
Isis, Osiris, all these different, you know what I mean, Anubis, all that stuff. Like there was all these different like new mystery cults.
From what I understand,
it was the era of mystery cults, and Augustus he didn't have one. Like if you look at Augustus, what was he worshiping? Everything. I'm not even joking. He got initiated in Athens mysteries. He got initiated in Eleusinian mysteries. He got initiated in Egypt. He got initiated in the Delphi mysteries. He just wanted to. The thing about Augustus is he was very, like, people think of pagans as like, oh, they were just a bunch of having orgies all the time, and they were a bunch of wicked. No, they were pious. They were, oh, you better get married. You better have children. You better not be homosexual.
Especially Caesar Augustus.
All the same jargon that you get with any other religion, you had with the Roman imperial cult.
Yeah.
Augustus was making it illegal for like
prostitution.
Yeah, prostitution, all types of stuff. So this idea of piety was already on the rise in Rome.
Yep.
And now
Christianity did not capitalize. They were not the monopoly.
No, they didn't come and save the world from evil paganism. It's all the same.
Yeah.
That's what I'm trying to understand. It's all the same. It's just repurposed.
Over time, they demonized it, is the thing.
Yes.
They ended up demonizing it, like we see with the heresiologists. You know, Osiris was cut into 14 pieces by Set, and he was scattered all over Egypt, where they were trying to find. Well, Isis is looking for his body, and she can't find his phallus, from what I understand. So she created like a dildo or whatnot, and ended up getting herself pregnant and creating Horus, or having birthing or Horus. Now I just Googled this because I've heard this in the past. It's just like, how many pieces was Osiris cut into? 14 pieces is what came up.
And check this out. Yeah, that's what happened, right? But listen to this. Osiris's Isis, when she puts him back, I'm not sure when he was dead or when you put him back, but either way, she conceives Horus. Yeah, that's what happened. After she brings him back, he goes into the underworld, but she conceives a child, Horus. And this is like it's basically like a mirror. Like he is like he becomes like the living embodiment of Osiris while Osiris is down in the underworld. Now it's Horus, and Osiris, that it's hard to explain. I don't want to say resurrection, but like it almost is, because Horus is like he is Osiris.
Right.
The Father and the Son are one. It's this really weird concept.
The building blocks for all this stuff is there. It's just doing different things in different cultures and different scenes and different mystery cults, whatever. And they all have different stories, but very similar motifs and a lot of differences. And nobody here is saying it's identical, like doing this zeitgeist thing where it's like, oh, this means that, and everything is lined up. And Horus was born on the 25th of December, and like all of this stuff without actually seeing sources that say such things. But you cannot, like, I want people to get out of that little. You ever seen that movie Bubble Boy?
Yeah.
He was growing up in a bubble. His mom told him if he ever left it, he'd die. And like, he's like lives his whole life. It's so silly, but it's a funny movie. His whole life, he's running around in this bubble. Then one day it pops and he thinks he's dead. And he's like, hold on, there's a whole world out there. Like, that's what it's like as a fundamentalist, finding out that your Christian tradition was not the first to be the true moral value of the world. They weren't the monopoly of the truth. They weren't the first people to understand resurrection. They weren't the first people. Like, they picked all this stuff up from other cultures. And this is why your church fathers go, well, Satan knew beforehand. That's why they all look like it. Oh,
Yeah.
which is more likely? Christianity is Johnny come lately and using all of this stuff, or Satan knew beforehand, thousands of years, already the building blocks to Christianity and the ideas are floating in the ancient world. Some of the stories even more interesting, by the way. There's a lot more fun stuff to go into, but we're supposed to believe that that's more plausible. That, I don't know why, what church father thought, let me make that the case, but Christians still buy that today sometimes.
Yeah.
Or they try to pretend all this stuff came later, and that's so not true. So you have to lie about the data.
So I want to bring something up real quick.
Okay.
So this I just thought of this because you had this sort of Trinity in Egypt. I'm not kidding. Litwood agrees with me, and I'm not going full zeitgeist saying Horus is Jesus. They're both born on December 25th, and they both got crucified. No, none of that's true. But in the Egyptian sense, there is let me just read a quote from an Egyptologist. I have a really good quote here. And then I'm going to get to this part of Apuleius' book. And I'm going to show you why salvation, resurrection, all these motifs are found within this trinity of Egyptian gods. So, British Egyptologist Sir E.A. Wallace Budge summed it up on page 7 of his book, Osiris and Egyptian Resurrection. He says this is an Egyptologist, so we should take him seriously. The central figure of the ancient Egyptian religion was Osiris, and the chief fundamentals of his followers were the belief in his divinity, death, and resurrection, and absolute control of the destinies of the bodies of souls of men. The central point of each Osirian's religion was his hope of resurrection in a transformed body and immortality, which could only be realized by him through the death and resurrection of Osiris. Now, obviously, there's mummies in Egypt, so obviously they have some sort of belief in a physical resurrection. Otherwise, why would they be mummifying bodies, right? What would they care?
Yeah, I would say that's not unlikely.
And check this out. Apparently, when somebody died, they were given the name Osiris. All dead people, males, females, rich, poor, were called Osiris in funerary text throughout all the ages of Egypt. This was a universal thing throughout all the Egyptian. So basically, what happens is when you died, you became one with Osiris.
Right.
They became the Osiris. But here's the thing. Okay, so Osiris is the resurrection, but Isis is the salvation. Now I'm going to read you a little text real quick.
Okay.
So this is from book 11 of Apuleius' Golden Ass. And he says, so basically, I'll just give you a little context. Apuleius, or the main character, is turning into an ass. He's lived
a donkey for those who don't know.
He's lived a wild life, and all of a sudden now he wants to get saved. So he goes to the temple of Isis in Rome. Isis, the Holy Spirit, descends on him and tells him to go to Rome. Okay. He gets a vision from Isis. Go to Rome. You'll get saved there. So he goes to Rome. He's living in like Phrygia or something like that, somewhere in the west or east. So then he gets there and it says, I was keen to purify myself at once. So I bathed myself in the sea waters, plunging my head 7 times beneath the waves. For Pythagoras of godlike fame proclaimed the number to be especially officious in sacred rites. Then, with tears in my eyes, I addressed this prayer to the goddess Isis. Now, before I'm just going to say one more thing about this. So he gets baptized in the name of Isis. Now, then 7 times. Why is it 7 times? That's weird. Well, it turns out that one of the nicknames for Osiris was Saba. The word Saba in Egyptian, and if you know Hebrew, you're probably like, whoa, that's 7. Yeah, same word. So the number 7 means lion or 7 in Egyptian. So that was one of his nicknames. Osiris was the number 7.
Right.
So they're dipping him in 7 times. He's getting baptized. So not only does he get baptized, he gets converted by the priest. The priest wearing all white with a shaved head, which is like It's weird. It sounds like, it looks like a Christian priest, basically. Like, you know what I mean? Like they
Yeah.
have the shaved head thing. He gets baptized, he converts, and then he's saved, and then he becomes a human again. His ass-like figure, he just stops turning into an ass. He goes back to a human. So the same process of getting saved in Christianity. You get baptized, you convert, and then you're saved. The same concept was with the cult of Isis, but
So I don't know why, like you said, the dunking 7 times. And of course, I'm thinking to myself, it makes me wonder, like, did Christians, the earliest Christians, were they dunking when they did baptism? Like, did they possibly dunk you 7 times? I ask because there's biblical precedents for this. And so, just so you know, the name Naaman, according to biblical names, let's see, I wanted to figure out what the name Naaman means. In biblical name meaning name is beautiful or agreeable. I don't know if this is correct. Sheknows.com. Amazing name Naaman meaning in etymology. So it's a pleasantness, from the noun naaman, pleasantness, which comes from the verb to be pleasant. So it's this idea of being pleasant, right? Well, in this Elijah and Naaman story, it talks about Naaman came to Elisha's home, which is the person who asked for double what Elijah, who gets taken up in a chariot by fire, he asked for like double his skills and what he did. And if you read Elijah and Elisha's story in Kings, you'll find that Elisha, however you want to pronounce the second prophet that comes on, does twice the amount of miracles. And I think, and I could be wrong here, Elijah did 7 and Elisha did 14 miracles. But also Elisha,
I didn't know that.
yeah, Elisha is the one that Naaman, this king, foreign king from a different land, comes to Elisha's home with his servants, horses, and chariots. And Elisha sent his servant to Naaman the Lord's instructions. The Lord would heal Naaman if he washed himself in the Jordan River 7 times.
Wow.
This is in 2 Kings 5:14. So he went down and dipped himself in the Jordan 7 times as the man of God had told him, and his flesh was restored and became clean like that of a young boy. 2 Kings 5:14.
Shut up.
I'm dead serious.
So that is so crazy.
I know, bro. So like you and me, man, I love like these ideas that we're getting into. We're exploring stuff in a way that we've never really tried to put the pieces together. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I love this. But yeah, Elisha did twice as much. Let me see. How many miracles did Elisha perform? 14. Twice as much as his spirit. Elijah said it was difficult request. 2 Kings 2:9. The Midrash says Elijah did 8 miracles. Sorry, and Elisha did 16. So I was wrong. Elisha did 16 and Elijah did 8. So he did double the miracles. I thought it was 7 and 14. Got those numbers wrong. That was a little bit on my part. There was a problem there. I made a mistake. But for sure, go read 2 Kings 5:14. And it's weird because the guy had leprosy. And after this happens, he asks Elisha, I think it's in this case, Naaman is saying, let me take a piece of your land. Can I bring it? Because the gods were attached to the lands. And maybe there's more to it. Because in Egypt, if Osiris is somehow part of the agriculture and this location in Egypt as this dying and rising god, you kind of have to wonder, is Naaman saying, let me take part of the land of Israel because this god's restored me in the myth of the biblical myth? It really makes you really want to ask more questions about this whole thing.
And I just want to cap it off, just to throw one more parallel at you with this Eucharist thing, because there really is no doubt that this Eucharist is a thing that it was pre-Christian. And Osiris, this is Herodotus talks about this in depth, but you don't have to go to Osiris. It's on the I'm trying to see where it says this. The pyramid text. So this is on the walls. That in Egyptian traditions, the wine was sacrificed for the blood of Osiris, Egyptians felt obligated to eat the meat of sacrificial bowl, to drink the wine during festivals, to receive divine blessing. The wine was the blood of. It's like everything else was the corn is his erection. Well, the wine is his blood. The blood? What? That's not. So what do you now? But it gets even. It's. This is how he gets equated with Dionysus, because he's the god of beer and wine. To most, Osiris was known as the god who invented beer and wine. So he did not even. It's not even just he invents it. He brings it to the world. They thought, and he was in charge of things like death and afterlife. But yeah, it just goes to show you that this. So I wanted to sort of go circle in on this thing.
Yeah,
I think because Augustus was initiating the Eleusinian mysteries, and I think that's a big deal. I think we should put Herod's temple dedicated to Augustus, right? And I think there's like this. I think that's like the start of like Hellenizing Judea, where it becomes, hey, Herod built a temple to Augustus. Right. Well, why don't we borrow some stuff from these?
Yeah, I don't see. I don't even know if it's borrow. If it's just, it might be permeating everything. It's like, let me ask you this: do you and me need to borrow Spider-Man, or is it not part of our culture? It's part of what it just is. So we might bring up Spider-Man, Superman, Batman, whatever, like whatever's in our culture. We don't have to borrow. It is part of ours. But the interesting thing, I think, getting back to examples of why I think the borrowing concept comes up is reading that story about Naaman and Elisha. In that story, after he dips himself and his skin is restored, because he's like, he beseeched the king of Israel, and he goes, the guy tears his robes and is like, am I God? Like, do I have the power to rise the dead? And he literally says, like, to kill and rise from the dead in that story. And then Elisha hears of the king tearing his robe and says, why are you doing that? Naaman comes to Elisha. He tells him go dip himself 7 times in that specific river. Naaman says, aren't there other rivers that are cleaner and better? And he says, I said go to the Jordan, dip yourself. After that, Naaman ends up finally at the end. He says, Naaman and all his descendants went back to the man of God, Elisha. He stood before him and said, now I know. Now here's that whole like borrowing thing. It's like they know these stories, but they want their version and their God to be the one that's supreme, right? So he says, as surely as he says, now I know that there is no God in all the world except in Israel. So please accept a gift from your servant. It makes me wonder, did they dip themselves in the Nile to cleanse themselves and purify themselves? Is there any evidence of that? Makes you wonder.
Well, if they're baptizing in the name of Isis, I would say yes.
Right.
I mean, we know what happened in Rome, right. But did Rome make this up? I doubt it. I highly doubt that Rome made up these Isis rites, because the Roman imperial cult was they really wanted to adopt and bring in all these new cults.
Right.
So they bring in priests of Osiris and Isis and bring them over to Rome and have them run the temples. But this is what I'm trying to. This is what I think is happening here. Is you have a universal myth. It's not copying or anything. There is a universal myth of, so going back to Sumer with Ishtar, going over to Egypt with Isis, up in Rome, Demeter. So you have Dionysus, Osiris, Tammuz, right?
Right.
But the Eleusinian mystery was the most important salvation religion or cult of the pre-Christian era of the Roman imperial cult, right? Now, so what we see is in the myth, in the hymn to Demeter, the Homeric hymn to Demeter, you basically have a retelling of the Ishtar story, slightly different. Dionysus is more important than I don't really know, but regardless, Demeter's Persephone goes down in the underworld. Demeter saves her. She goes back up. It's a agricultural thing, and they make a deal, and Adonis goes down there for half the year, just like Tammuz has to go down there for half the year. So they tweak it a little bit, but it's the same myth.
It's an agricultural dying and rising god myth. Yeah.
Yes, and then you had this same myth happening in Egypt with Osiris and Isis and Horus. Now, what I'm getting at is this idea of the 3-day motif, where Ishtar, when she goes down to save Ishtar, it just happens to be like the same day that Osiris dies on this full moon is when Ishtar goes down for 3 days, brings up Tammuz. The dead are resurrected. It says it right in the Babylonian text. The dead are resurrected as Ishtar and Tammuz are leaving the underworld. The dead are resurrected with them. And it's 3 days that she's down there for.
So I can't imagine that being a physical death, but or physical resurrection. But I do think
people get so hung up on that.
I know. I'm just wanting to make a point.
Matter.
I know it doesn't. It really doesn't for us, and I get it. It would for someone who wants their special one particular version of this thing to be true.
But they'll cling to anything that's different.
Think about this: if the all right, I want to get like a little bit deep here with you.
Does Ishtar die? No. But does Osiris die? Yes.
Well, let me just point out this Osiris thing, right? So we talked about this. If you're eating the wheat that is grown from the Nile's moistness on Isis, which is the land, right? Here is the land producing the fertile food that you're eating and drinking from. So here you have this combination of the sun and the moon, Isis and Osiris, and you are literally digesting the god. It dies, and you rise again with him. All right, it's a spiritual thing. Let's just say it's spiritual. Whoop do you frickin' do? The point is, this is exactly what we're seeing all throughout the ancient world, is that it makes me wonder if their ancestors who've died and whatnot, are also this Osiris that comes back. So it kind of ties into this ancestry worship thing.
But I can actually prove, but here's the thing though. It doesn't matter if it's a literal, he died on a cross and came back from, he was in a tomb. There is a death happening. Mm-hmm. And so I'll give you an example from the Hebrew Bible itself, from Ezekiel.
Right.
He says, "Then he brought me to the door of the gate of the Lord's house, which was toward the north, and behold, there sat women weeping for Tammuz."
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
Now, why would Ezekiel say that?
Right.
This was a big deal.
Yeah.
This was every year around the same time. It was a rite. It was tradition to cry for the death of Tammuz is dead.
Yeah. Right.
He's going to resurrect. Ishtar is going to save him. And he's going to come back up again. And the rising of the dog star. The dog star is Osiris.
Right.
So the Jews knew about this myth.
Yeah, it's in our Bible. Right.
Yeah, they're weeping for Tammuz.
Right.
And it almost gives you chills, because it's almost like a correct prophecy.
Right.
For the Jew. He says, behold, there sat women weeping for Tammuz, and then he tells them there will be abominations even worse than this. You almost want to sit there and give them credit. They're talking about Christian, and I know I'm just but it's like, but you could, if you were a Jew, you'd probably be like, they're talking about Christianity. Like, why wouldn't you, right?
Right, or at least there's a connection in some sense.
But no, the truth is, it's not a prophecy. The truth is, this was already happening. This was already a world myth. Eusebius tells us this, that Christianity is not new. This has been around forever. People say he was talking nonsense when he said that. I don't think he was. I think he's talking about what we're talking about right now.
Right. But of course, it's all pointing to his myth being true, it seems, I think. I mean, I can't imagine the church fathers acting like theirs wasn't the true one. They were superstitious. They may have saw the connections, but they all said, well, it all points to the real truth of what our Christ is. But I was thinking of baptism of the dead here, because I was thinking to myself, they're dipping, they're putting themselves under. Is there something to baptism of the dead and its connection to ancestors who passed away, who are needing to be united with the Christ? Or, to use an analogy, those who die are then united with Osiris, the Father. So you kind of ask yourself, like, what is this connection going on? What is going on here with the baptism of the dead? I can't imagine these influences didn't come from Egypt, or in some sense had their connections there. Or even ancient Sumer. John Knight Lunwall, that I've interviewed before, he thinks that there's this connection between waters and salvation. And you see it, like look in Revelation 20, right? Behold, I am the water of life, or I give you living waters, etc. But to those who are these bad people who aren't going to have salvation, they're going to be exactly like the rich man begging for water to touch their tongue because they get no salvation. Water and salvation come together. In fact, you must first be born of water, then from above, in order to have salvation, according to John. So when you think about this whole water thing, what happens? There's this motif. There's a flood, which comes and wipes away the wicked, but then salvation comes. And it's this idea that goes even back to the ancient Sumerian myths. And he thinks that eternal life comes through this water thing that you've got to go through, something to do with water. And I don't know. I don't know what to make of some of this stuff, because in the end, the wicked are going to be judged by fire. But the
Right.
righteous aren't going to have to
And you
endure the
have
fire.
this water and fire motif that we see in Osiris and Seth.
Right. So something else is going on, man. This has been like, there's so much we're going to continue to learn. I wanted to jump on here and just spit some information and see what our minds would go through and what we would think about. You know what I mean?
Yeah, and as I'm reading through these Egyptian Book of the Dead texts, there's a reoccurring theme that I notice. It's this idea of attaining glory. The soul achieves glory and then joins it with Osiris. That's the goal. The goal is to get to Osiris.
Yeah.
To be able to drink wine and eat bread with him every day for eternity. Now I think of Peter, 1 Peter 1:2-1. It says, God that raised him up from the dead and gave him glory. And then it says to go to the Father.
Right.
All this stuff is like, and so I'm starting to become more and more convinced that Christianity is a repurposing of this ancient, very ancient, universal myth that was retold by the Greeks in the Eleusinian mysteries, and the Romans and the Egyptians, and they all had their own
Persians.
Christianity comes around and makes this is gonna be the myth to end all myths, and they really, you have to give it credit. You have to give the New Testament credit. They somehow made a myth that it fulfills the Old Testament. Not that the stuff really happened, but like mythically, all these stories connect to the Old Testament, but they also retell the other important mystery religions.
They retell other myths that they're trying to act like theirs is better. That's why you see Naaman, I just pointed out when he dunked himself, he's like, I know that this is the true God, the God of Israel. Oh, really? Really? Like, really? Because you could see this in Egypt before Israel. You could see this in Mesopotamia and Sumer before Israel. But they're polemically attacking a lot of these other stories to show theirs is the true one.
It makes you wonder if Zalmoxis was doing the same thing. They were trying to make their own Christianity. I'm not saying it was Christianity.
No, I just think there's something.
The people of Thrace were making their own religion, and they were borrowing the same stuff that Christianity's borrowing.
Yeah, because there's so much in common.
Think about what I just say about what happens when you go to the underworld. You go to Osiris to live with him forever.
Right.
What does it say? It says you go to Zalmoxis.
Right.
And you are one with Zalmoxis.
And not only that, but there is resurrection idea there. There is this eternal life idea there. Like, come on. And I just think there's so much more that people can keep looking, keep opening their minds to. And what it does for me is it tells me these are common mythological superstitions, if you will, of the ancient world, where we didn't understand things the way we do now. And it kind of takes that superstitious bubble and pops it. It makes you also appreciate, just understanding how humans thought and the way that they connected themselves to the natural world. These are the things it does for me, but it also tells me that it's a double standard, and it would be an error to pretend Christianity's true and everything else is false. At least go, okay, maybe there's this running theme in the world, right? Start taking the approach that maybe there's truth in all of this. And then you could start to explore things and say, maybe this is outdated storytelling that is we're taking too literal, taking too serious today. And we're just not understanding how they kept cultures and how they kept time, how they kept calendars, how they kept the superstitions in the world, the way they viewed the world. Like, they're eating the god when they're eating the crop. We don't think that way.
Right.
We're not eating McDonald's or eating our meal and thinking, you know what? I just ate Osiris. I'm so glad. Christians don't do that even when they eat a regular meal. They do it with the Eucharist and these special magical words that you were reading about in the hymns of the Book of the Dead. They read these, and this is your body, this is his blood, and we're eating it, and we're gonna have eternal life because we're eating of this Eucharist that gives us life. It's like, what?
And it's funny because we call it magic when it's not our own religion.
Mm-hmm.
Look at like Hindus and like they're doing magic, but I mean, here I'm just going to say, well, this is the last thing I want to.
Yeah, please. We'll end on this.
So it's funny that I forgot about this. I can't believe I almost forgot about the 7 times thing, right?
Mm-hmm.
I can't believe I forgot about this. Okay, this is going back to the Torah, the Leviticus, and it says, so if a priest sins, the priests are not supposed to sin. An anointed priest. I looked up the Hebrew. It says Mosiach. So a Messiah priest. This is what it says in Hebrew. The anointed priest who thus sins and thereby makes the people guilty. So he shall present a Lord a young unblemished bull as a sin offering for the sin he committed. Bring the bullock to the entrance to the meeting tent before the Lord. He shall lay his hand on the head and slaughter it before the Lord. The anointed priest, the Messiah priest, shall then take some of the bullock's blood, bring it into the meeting tent, where dipping the finger in the blood 7 times, he shall sprinkle it 7 times before the Lord toward the veil of the sanctuary. The priest shall also put some blood on the horns of the altar of the fragrant incense, just like the Book of the Dead.
Yeah,
and the of the incense, which is the before the Lord of the meeting tent.
And there's 7 elements in the tent, in the tabernacle.
It's so obvious. This is all. Yeah. This is just.
It's repackaged Sumerian and Egyptian, and who knows what else might be playing its role from Lotan finding his way into the myth, and that's Lotan and Leviathan and all this stuff.
And that's what I want to end up. And it's not just Christianity; it's Judaism doing it too. The Old Testament did it first. The New Testament just did the same thing in a new time period with a new language, Greek.
Who is your daddy, and what does he do? You have just attained true gnosis, and we are MythVision. Ladies and gentlemen, join MythVision's Patreon not only to support us, but there are 72 videos that I did with Dr. Dennis R. McDonald and Richard Carrier, all on the Patreon, early access. You guys can ask personal questions when I go to interview these scholars, and you're helping MythVision.